Hey guys, this is Flying Space Llama here. Just wanted to show you a quick tutorial on how to create a simple object in Blender. Today we're going to be making a very simple water barrel. This is part one of a two-part tutorial. Part one covers creating the object in Blender. Part two is going to cover importing the object into the UDK. Now if you're using a different engine or if you're just wanting to mess around with Blender, that's perfectly fine. Stick around. Part one applies completely to you. All of the UDK stuff will be in part two, including exporting, including importing into the UDK. We're going to set it up as dynamic so that when you run into it, when you shoot it, it kind of moves around, it responds accordingly, so it's not just a static mesh sitting there taking up space. But in part one, we're just going to go over the very simple basics of modeling and texturing. And what we're going to want to do to begin with, obviously, is to load Blender. Now I'm using version 2.69. If you're using a different version, it should be just fine. What we're going to use here is mostly very basic functions. You're not going to see anything really complex going on here. Again, this is a tutorial completely for beginners. What we're going to want to do at the beginning is to tap the A key. We'll tap it twice to make sure everything is selected. Just go ahead and delete it using the delete and enter. And what we're going to want to do, in order, since we are doing scaling for the UDK, I actually have a yardstick that I'm going to use. Go with append. I should be able to go into my miscellaneous folder, use scaling yardstick, and attach the cube mesh. Now this is not going to show anything on the yardstick. You're not going to see any rulings there. However, it is textured, so if we go into this panel here to the right, go to shading and select textured solid, then we actually see the texture that is applied. If you go into UV image editor, it will be the yardstick texture.tga, and this is not by any means an optimized texture. It is just used for scaling purposes. We can go back into the 3D view. You see you got inch rulings, and this is set up to be fairly precise into the UDK. An inch is virtually identical to an inch. The scaling actually applies perfectly to UDK. The only thing is trying to get the texture to fit there. Sometimes you run into issues, so I wouldn't hold a scaling instrument like this to within a millimeter or two precision if you're for some reason going to need that in a game. Okay, so what we're going to want to do to start with this barrel, we want the origin to be at 0, 0, 0. So in order to do that, we hold Control, tap S, cursor to center. Now, as you can see, the cursor was already in the center. It didn't move, but if your cursor was over here, you could still just do the same thing. Control S and cursor to center. The very first portion of this barrel, and we're just doing the low poly model here. We're not actually doing a super complex anything. In later stages, you may want to make a high poly and then create a low poly from that. Bake your normal maps, etc. That's a little more complex than we're getting into with this video. So we go into Add Mesh Cylinder. Since this is a fairly simple tutorial, we don't want to make anything super complex in terms of poly count. So we're actually going to back this down to, let's say, about 18 sides for this cylinder. That keeps your try count way down. Go ahead and tap Enter on that. Just make sure everything's applied. And then we make sure our cylinder is selected. Go into edit mode. I'm going to do a loop cut and slide. See the purple ring goes around the center of the cylinder. Go ahead and tap it. And now comes the slide portion. Just click anywhere outside of the cylinder with the right mouse button. That deselects the slide function. It actually snaps directly to the center. What we're going to do now is, since we do want the origin at 0, 0, 0, and the center is at 0, 0, 0 right now, we want it actually to be the center of the bottom portion of the barrel. So what we're going to do is go into line select mode. Down here at the bottom is line select. You've got vertex select, line select, or edge select, and face select. We're going to hold down Alt and select one of the edges along the bottom. We can go ahead and delete. We actually want to do vertices for this one. So we're deleting the edges and the vertices connected, so these lines vertically go away as well. While we're still in edge select mode, we hold Alt once again, select this bottom portion, and seeing as how that's open, and if we knock the barrel over, we're going to want to be able to see the bottom of the barrel, we go ahead and tap F. That is the fill function. If you have vertices selected that you want to fill in, you just go ahead and tap the F key, and that takes care of it. Now, from the research that I've done, a barrel, standard 55-gallon water barrel, is about 24 inches in diameter. So what we're going to want to do while we're still in edit mode, always do your scaling in edit mode. It just works so much better than doing it in an object mode. We're going to select all using the A key. You may have to tap it twice if you have anything selected. I'm going to zoom over here. Now, since we want it 24 inches and our yardstick is 36 inches, that's 12 inches less. We actually want to be 6 inches less on each side. So we're going to bring our vertex out roughly to the 30 mark. In order to do that, what we want to do is scale by tapping S. Now, as you can see, it's scaling in all directions. We want that bottom to stay at origin 0 on the Z-axis. So what we do is hold Shift and tap Z while in that scaling mode. It scales along everything except Z. Now we might actually have to do this a couple of times depending on where your mouse cursor is in order to get it to scale all the way. If your mouse cursor is closer to the origin, it tends to scale a whole lot faster. But if you want to scale with a little more precision, move your mouse cursor away from the origin. We just want that roughly at the 30 mark. It doesn't have to be very precise. Obviously, this is not even going to be used in game. Okay, now that we've got that scaling out of the way, there's our width scaling. We need to scale for height. So we need to go into object mode, select our yardstick, and if you don't have a yardstick, that's perfectly fine. You can eyeball it. You can create your own measurement system. I personally just made a yardstick using the UDK and imported it into Blender. That's how I scale everything. What we're going to want to do though with that yardstick in order to scale the height, typical height of a 55-gallon water barrel is roughly 36 inches, which is the same height as our yardstick actually. So we're going to hit rotate using the R key, constrain that to the X axis by tapping the X key. And we're going to rotate that 90 degrees. Hit enter to apply that rotation. And we move it upwards until it's roughly at 0 on the Z-axis. Doesn't have to be precise. Now, in order to apply this origin back to the center, what we're going to want to do is to hit Control A, apply location, Control A again, and apply rotation and scale. Alright, so that is locked into where we need it to be. Go ahead and select the barrel object once again. Go into edit mode. For this, we're going to want to go to face select mode. Go ahead and tap face select and select the very top face. Okay, we're going to just scale that up, or to actually grab along the Z-axis using that arrow up to roughly the top of the yardstick. Makes it a little easier if you can actually see the yardstick, because what we're going to do now that we've got everything scaled, is go into object mode, select that yardstick, and just delete it, because we don't need it anymore. And okay, there we go. Now we select our cylinder again, go back into edit mode. And what I want to do, since most water barrels that you typically see are, they're a little bulged in the middle, they're a little smaller radius there along the bottom and along the top. So what we're going to do actually is another loop cut and slide. Again, just click, the left mouse button, goes into slide mode, and we click outside of it with the right mouse button. Okay. And we're going to go into edge select mode again. Hold Alt, select the top face. Hold Shift Alt to select the bottom face as well. Anytime you hold Shift, it's giving Blender the command select this too. So now that we've got both top and bottom faces selected, we actually can hit scale. We don't want to scale them along the Z-axis because we end up with this weird UFO shaped object. So again, Shift Z. That constrains it to everything but the Z-axis, and we only want to scale it just a tiny, tiny bit. That actually should be just fine right there. It looks perfect. We're not going to get really much more complex with that. Really don't want to go into a whole lot of detail because you make this video super, super long and boring. One thing that I do want to do just to show you how to do it, and this is on many, many other Blender tutorials, but if you just didn't happen to catch one of those, I'd like you to see it on this one. What we're going to want to do is actually make the indentation that is in the top of the lid. In order to do that, you go into face select mode, select the top face of the barrel. We're going to hit outside, move the mouse outside, hold Control and hit F. What we want to do is inset faces. Just inset roughly the width of the rim on the lid. And while we're still in face select mode, we select this center face. Again, Control F, inset faces, and just a little bit there. Now we select once again that center ring, and we actually can move it along the Z-axis. We just want to drop it just a little bit. And what we've done is create an inset portion for the lid. You've got to really watch this on the cylinders because it makes your try count just absolutely jump through the roof. Every time you do it, you're actually multiplying your number of polys. Not necessarily on the whole model, but you're multiplying the added number of polys by the number of sides to the cylinder. So for instance, we just did 2 extrudes. That's 2 multiplications times 18. Really adds up quick. If we keep on doing that, we would end up with a super, super high poly object. And actually, ideally, we would want to avoid using this at all in our end game mesh. I just wanted to show you how to do it. Right now our try count is at 176. I'm not really concerned about that, so what we're gonna do is go ahead and back into object mode, make sure everything is applied using a Control A, apply location, rotation and scale. Now the reason we do this is if you're exporting into an FBX format, it tends to give you all kinds of problems if you have a rotation, a scale, or a location applied that hasn't been actually applied in Blender, that hasn't been locked in. Okay, so what we're going to want to do now, since this is pretty much it for the modeling portion, let's go ahead and save our file. Let's File, Save As, and we're going to go all the way to our desktop, and I've got a folder created there on my desktop for tutorial barrel. Just open that file, and we're going to save it as tutorial barrel in camelcase.blend. Camel case, in case you're not familiar with any programming concepts, etc., is when you run the words together and you capitalize the first letter of each word. That helps to kind of identify separate words. It works very well with programs that don't recognize spaces in file names. If we were to save this as tutorial space barrel.blend, it would open perfectly in Blender. It honestly would open perfectly in UDK, but we want to avoid doing that because we may be using a program that doesn't like spaces in the file name. So what we're going to do, now that we've got that tutorial barrel.blend, we just go ahead and hit save. So that pretty much is it for the modeling portion of the tutorial. Now we jump into a very interesting part, and one which I had trouble finding some tutorials on the simple mechanics of how to do this. Everybody seems to offer tutorials on very complex texturing methods, but they don't give you the basics. So that's what I'm going to try to do with this. We're not going to go crazy with it by any means. What I would like to do first, before I really do any texturing, because this barrel looks really flat, you go ahead and select it in object mode, use smooth shading. Now it looks a whole lot better. There's actually a modifier in Blender that we can use that's going to make it look even better than that. We go into the modifiers, add modifier, edge split. That automatically splits edges that are 30 degrees or greater. You can see it splits the bottom, the top rim, and the inset of the top rim. It leaves everything else smooth shaded. This actually imports into the UDK as everything being smooth shaded, but it is broken vertices there along each edge, so it shows as individual objects, if that makes any sense. Okay, so we've got that done. Looks pretty good. The shape is pretty much there. Again, nothing super complex, but it looks okay. So now we're going to go into edit mode and begin with UV unwrapping. What I'm going to do is a very simple projection of this barrel. There are a lot of ways that you can do this. The simplest to me, just looking at this shape, appears to be if I were to use Alt select with the edge select again, select our top, Shift Alt select our bottom. Okay, so we've got those two selected. And I also want to do just Shift, do not hold Alt, just Shift, this edge and this edge. So we've just created one flat surface here. If you look, everything's cut out except for this flat surface. We go here to Mark Seam. Okay, so that seam is marked. Now what I like to do, rather than actually unwrapping everything at once, you can double tap A to select everything and just unwrap it once. It actually will work just fine. But what I like to do is actually select, using face select, the individual faces that I want to unwrap at once. It gives you a whole lot more control because your UV map is not quite so cluttered at any given point in time. So we're just going to go through here, and no, this is not the easiest way to do that. I could actually hold Control and select these faces, but just selecting them one by one to show you what's going on. Alright, so we've got all the faces selected, and it generally does. The last face that you selected, it shades differently, just to show that it is the last face selected. Useful in some merge functions, etc. Any other function, it generally gets in the way, but you can learn to ignore it. Okay, so what we're going to want to do here is go to unwrap and just unwrap that. Before I do though, I want to actually go up here to the little lines here and drag another view into my screen. You can just minimize that portion. Go into UV/image editor, and we want to create a new image. 1024 by 1024 is quite a bit excessive for this, so we're going to want to do maybe a 512 by 512. Again, just a very simple, basic barrel, so we don't want to do anything super complex. Alright, now you can see it's already showing some weirdness going on there, but if we unwrap, there's our barrel right there. Should be fine where it's at. Let's scale it so it doesn't touch the edges and grab it along the Y axis. Just tap G and Y to constrain it on the Y axis. Again, scale is just the S key with nothing else. Move it up so no vertices are touching or near the edges. Alright, so there's that portion of it unwrapped. That was a very simple process. Next I'm going to unwrap the top. Again, using face select, I can select that center portion. And for something like this that's fairly symmetrical, you actually can use select more. That function is Control plus. Alright, and it's not wanting to work for me. Ah, I see why. That edge split actually creates two edges right here. This is two edges, not one. So you got to watch that if you're really wanting to keep an eye on your vertices. I personally don't care since this is a simple project. We're just going to want to tap Shift and select, Shift, while holding Shift, select a portion of this top rim. And since it is edge split, it's not going to leak down onto the sides. We just, again, select more using Control plus. Selects the entire top portion. And we can use a simple unwrap. Shows everything separately, which is just loads of fun. But we can again select one vertex from, that's this inner ring right here. Control plus, just keep tapping plus to select more until the whole thing is selected. Grab it, move it down to roughly the center and scale it so that no vertices overlap. If you get overlapping vertices, it is a pain. Right, we select one vertex of the actual face of the barrel. Again, Control plus to select all vertices. Grab, move to roughly the center and scale until no vertices touch. Now we hold Control and select all of these vertices, and G to grab, move it up toward the top, something like that. Now to see these vertices that we unwrapped from previously, we actually make sure that your image is selected here so that everything displays on the same image in the same material. But to see these vertices we unwrapped previously, we actually just tap A twice. And as you can see, we've got some overlapping that we need to take care of. So just holding Shift, select these three vertices, one of each individual unit. Use the Select More key and scale this down and pan it until no vertices overlap. Alright, we got one more side to go, and that's just this one face right here. Again, we're going to want to select this untitled image, and we're going to want to UV unwrap. This one's going to be very simple. Once again, using our Select More function, scaling, and grab it over here, select all, and none of our vertexes overlap. We got everything pretty much taken care of there. Alright, so now comes the interesting portion. Before I go any farther, I am going to go ahead and save. Now comes for actually texturing the object itself. There are a few different ways to do this. We can edit this image in an external editor. In order to do so, you would just save as image. Let's go to my desktop, tutorial barrel, and we want it to be started to save it as a blend file. I don't think that would open too well. Okay, again, camel case tutorial barrel text.png, and I do apologize for mistyping everything. I'm using a Razer Arctosa keyboard with the black letters on it, so I can't see a thing. I'm typing entirely by feel, which is kind of interesting. Very nice keyboard though, very nice. I like it. Okay, let's go ahead and save that image. And in order to save this UV layout, because the image itself doesn't have any markings whatsoever to denote where the UVs are, we go to UVs, export UV layout, and we're in tutorialbarrel.png. We don't want to use that. We actually want to use tutorial barrel uv.png to denote that it is the UV. We are in the correct folder, the desktop/tutorial barrel folder. So we can go ahead and export UV layout. Now actually we can open this up and you can see previews there. That opens up. You can go open the texture, which is actually just a blank file right now. Now in order to overlay this, I'm personally using paint.net. It's just a very easy tool for quick edits. You're not going to get any kind of precision out of it, but that's what other programs are for. Paint.net is just a really simple tool to use if you want to do something quickly. So I'll go to select all, copy, paste in a new layer, and those functions are going to be about the same regardless of what application you're using, whether it's Paint.net, GIMP, Photoshop. I would suggest looking around for different applications. There's a lot to be had, open source and free. For instance, Paint.net is completely free. GIMP is completely free. Between those two applications, you honestly have more power than Photoshop ever thought of having anyway. So we can see our UV map here is overlaid in two separate layers. You always want to keep the layers separate. And then we've got our background layer. That's the layer we're going to edit. Now just for the sake of showing you how this works, I'm going to do some doodles here in a nice bright magenta color. Okay, just to show you kind of how external editing works, we're going to want to go ahead and delete that UV layer. This is our map right here. This is actually our saved texture. So all we do is File, Save As. We want it to be this same file name. You can just go ahead and save over. Yes to replacing. Don't really care about compression options at this point in time. Again, for simple tutorial, that is not important. Close that out, and we've got our edited and saved texture. Okay, so we go back into Blender, and it's still showing our old image. Now when it does that, there is something that you have to do to get the new image to show up. You go to Image, Reload Image. And as you can see, it's showing our beautiful, professionally done, externally edited image. You go to Object Mode and view that the way that it actually will show up in the game. Obviously, it looks truly awful. I hate to say my artistic skills are just not so great when it comes to painting, so we're going to actually go ahead and paint over that. What we want to do is go back into Edit Mode. Just shows our vertices here. Go into Paint in the UV editor. When you do that, this window right here that pops up to the left hand side is your paint menu. I want to paint it kind of a bluish color because that's generally what water barrels tend to be. Select our radius, and this on the UV editor side is static, meaning no matter how much you zoom out or zoom in, it actually affects per pixel the image. It doesn't scale based on zoom. So we're just going to paint around all of these UVs. I've got my strength set to 0.7, which is not really ideal because you see this bleed through going on here. So if we set the scale, or if we set the strength to 1.0, full strength, It actually paints 100%. And as you can see, we've covered most of the image. Now there's a different way to do this. Works a whole lot better on more complex stuff. You actually can just leave this open. I'm going to push it to the side just a little bit so we can see easier what we're doing here. You can look at this 3D mesh here. Go into texture paint mode. It's actually going to retain the options from this window over here when we go into texture paint mode. So if I wanted to paint something on the top, let's say there are a couple of caps that go on this lid, usually for pouring purposes on most barrels. Really not the best way to do this by painting them on, but I can't think of anything else good to paint right now. So we're going to paint just a white splotch there for a cap and a white splotch there. And from far away, this actually does kind of look like a water barrel now. And then from down here, we're probably going to want to do some kind of design or something to show this is a unique creation. So I'm just going to put Z, first initial there. So we got our Z there, and that kind of gives us a little more detail to show once we import into UDK or something like that. And also gives me an opportunity to show you just how small a detail you can get with the texture paint function. As you can see in the UV editor, it's pretty small. It's a lot easier to get things to show up the right size and in the right position when you go to texture paint versus paint in the UV editor. Okay, so now that we've got this pretty much figured out, let's go ahead and save our image again. Just again, image, save image, and that saves right over that original image that we had here in our tutorial barrel folder. You can see that our image is saved there, and this is completely, it's not used for anything but external edited files. So go back into the Blender and save one more time. So that pretty much covers it for this portion of the tutorial. We've gone from absolutely zero to a fully created barrel. If you'll stick around for part 2 of the tutorial, it's going to show you just a little bit more detail about how to export, how to get that into the UDK, and just some wrap up on that. Basically want to show you how to get something from absolute zero into the UDK and create a playable object from nothing. Okay, so that's it for tutorial 1. Guys, join me for tutorial 2. Thank you for watching and have a great day.